Thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence. We're a nonprofit membership organization dedicated to helping you streamline your RFP process through better education, smarter strategies, and more transparency. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive training, discounts to our virtual and in-person events, and the chance to connect with other procurement professionals throughout the year. And if you're planning a professional event or conference, don't forget our CPE Speakers Bureau is available to speak at regional and national gatherings. Now let's get into today's session of Ask the RFP Doctor, where one of our expert RFP doctors will show you how to take on real-world challenges in procurement and supply chain management and break them down into practical strategies you can use right away.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
So today, the primary topic is on the negotiation phase of a procurement process, and we're going to talk about what happens when you see some red flags in a vendor's proposal, even if they are the top-rated, top-evaluated proposal, and you're excited to work with them, you want to get that contract signed, but it can be simultaneously true that you're excited to get going and think you have a good deal, good option, and highly qualified team in front of you, but you also still may have some questions and some things that make you scratch your head, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. A friendly reminder on what the negotiation phase is. I think most of you who are regulars here at RFP Doctor and some of our other online courses through our friends at NASPO and so forth may be familiar with this that we show quite a bit, which is our basic procurement process. So we're going to imagine proposals are in hands, maybe not in this old school manila envelope physical style that I'm showing here on the screen, but you've got the proposals in hands. You've already done your responsibility kind of checks, make sure everything's on time and done correctly. Presumably you've gone through some type of written evaluation. You've also collected cost or fee in there as well, and that might be something that could raise a red flag to you, which we'll discuss here today. And then oftentimes you have interviews, presentations, maybe even a product demo if it's software or something like that. And at the end of all that, you've made your full evaluation determination. You've identified who that single top-rated, top-evaluated supplier is. You're inviting them into that negotiation phase. And there's more activity that can happen here before we sign the dotted line of that contract. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today is what are some of the things we could be doing in that negotiation phase to address the occasions where you've seen a red flag, you've seen something curious or that raised your eyebrow during the evaluation process. This negotiation phase is your last chance to get that rectified, looked at, confirmed, clarified, adjusted, whatever, prior to signing that dotted line. So that's what Jason's going to talk about today. I believe he will also be commenting on some of the things that happen during the evaluation phase that can raise your eyebrow and kind of tip you off that there's something going on. And how you can even get ahead of things before you get to the negotiation phase. So there is that as well. And I think the last thing I wanted to mention before handing the reins over to Jason is many of you may have heard in our prior sessions, we've had a series of different topics on the negotiation phase. And you know that our take here at CPE is that it seems like most organizations spend the bulk of their effort focused on the actual contractual terms, the terms and conditions, getting that agreement fleshed out. And there's not as much effort focused on clarifying and planning how is this relationship with our new supplier going to proceed. And so we do recommend that you have that two-phase or two parallel streams of activities and negotiations where, yeah, you have to look at the legal side of it, get your terms and conditions ironed out. Nothing wrong with that. And we always joke that, get the lawyers involved and let them do their thing. But on top of that, how can we be helping set up our internal project teams, our agencies, our end users for success by clarifying things further with our supplier teams? That's not so much what we're going to be discussing here today, but that's our goal in negotiations is to make sure we're focusing on that as a project team. And the very first thing you're going to want to address as a part of those planning activities is if there are some red flags, potential deal breakers, things that just you don't understand in that supplier's proposal, don't go into planning out some nitty-gritty details with them before addressing those big ticket items. That's what we'd recommend that you focus on. So with that, I will stop yapping at you, stop in the share here. I'm going to pass it over to Jason to take over for me, and he's going to share some of his past experiences at the state of Alaska where they had a highly successful procurement and great outcomes which he can share, but there were still things that pop up in a procurement process, and the purpose of a good procurement process is to give you the chance as the client, as the state in this case, to address those things. So, Jason, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, I saw Victor Lemer in the chat, who we worked together for years and years. He was there when all of this happened. So he said negotiation items are things that make you go, hmm. And yeah, it's true. That's one thing. One way I always sort of thought about it as well is often on like a construction project or a renovation, you go through and you put the little piece of masking tape on every little, defect that's in there. And I always thought about negotiations in that way. You're looking at the proposal, it looks good, but there are just some little things left, the little things you put the tape on that you want to go through and make sure are addressed. Um, and depending on where you're at, your ability to negotiate as a government can be really, broad or very limited. Like for us in Alaska, we couldn't negotiate anything. So once we got to actual what we called negotiations, we couldn't do anything that would have the effect of changing the ranking of the proposals, which was a really interesting thing. We had to take care of that during what we termed discussions. You all will have, different parts of your process. But discussions for us is where we could get a best and final offer and then move into negotiations. And each filter kind of, the things we were dealing with were smaller and smaller. That's where, when we were working on this project, it's a statewide telecom network services project. So basically providing telecommunications and internet services across the state of Alaska. We approached it differently. So we were able to negotiate more of those bigger items with Simplar's help, actually, as the coach, for us to help navigate this historically very, for us, what was very, I want to say, protest laden process that I was tasked with leading by my boss without any protests. So no pressure at all. So we'll walk through a little bit what that project looked like here. Start off just level setting Alaska. So when I say statewide telecommunications and internet services, uh, you might think, oh, that's easy. Tons of companies do that. It's not a big deal. This is typically how what we call down south or the lower 48 sees Alaska. We're nicely situated off the coast of Baja, California there, surrounded by a box right next to Hawaii. I'm still in Alaska. You can see the weather here is great. This is not a virtual background at all, I swear. It actually is. So this is, it's easy to get lost in like, oh, Alaska is just another state like, New Mexico or Pennsylvania, whatever. How we see ourselves is more like this, here's Alaska. It's giant. You got the lower 48 in Hawaii off in a box off the in the Gulf of Alaska there. But really the reality is somewhere in between. We are a big state. We're not that big. We are a big state, more than twice the size of Texas. Sorry, Texas. If you plot it out over the lower 48, Jacksonville to San Francisco, east to west, and Jacksonville all the way up to Bismarck, North Dakota, north to south. So 2,700 miles east to west, 1,400 miles north to south. A lot of this land does not have any roads, any infrastructure in it. It's all just open land. We have, if you were to spread out our population of around 750,000 people across our state, every single person would have more than 1 square mile to themselves. So you can imagine that getting telecom and internet services out to these rural places where there are no roads, no telephone poles, no nothing. You're doing it through satellites, through cell signals. It's a pretty big ask, and we have state offices all over the state. So it was a big project, literally, and it was also pretty politically sensitive. And this was my first project as chief procurement officer. I had been a contracting officer previously. I moved into the chief procurement officer role and was tasked with this. Like, we want your name on this RFP. and we want more competition and no protests. Okay. So it was a big deep breath. So it was a big project. We had $50 million budgeted based on past, kind of history with this project. And, these are the four kind of buckets of service that we were looking at awarding contracts in. So we had, telephone, pick up the phone and call somebody services. We had data network, so internet, video conferencing, and then help desk support for all of that. And these, we, worked through how to approach this. And is it better to do it all in one? Do we want to separate it out into different contracts, different portions of work? And we leaned into the latter just to try, with the goal of increasing competition. If somebody was really good at all four of these buckets and could provide, the best service across all of them, awesome. We would make that award. If we found that there was a, kind of center of excellence, somebody can do one of these things really well and be able to work with whoever did these other pieces, cool, we were open to that as well. And that was coming from, us on the procurement side as well as our IT folks. At the time, like I said, 500 access sites spread out across the state. So it's not just 500 access sites in a metropolitan area. It was 500 access sites 2,000 miles apart from each other, east to west, up to 1,400 miles apart from each other, north to south. So a lot of geography in there. You can see all the other information here, 17,000 employees across the state accessing all of this infrastructure that we were looking to establish. So Brian mentioned, I would talk a little bit about red flags that you might come across in a, before you even get to negotiations. And that's, we're all procurement people here. We've seen them. You're looking through a proposal and you see things that were copied and pasted from other proposals. Those are pretty easy to catch. Missing forms, missing, information that affects, responsiveness. Those are things we should have some sort of checklist to look at. Conditional language is one that I always was very keen on finding. It's the type of thing where if the state of Alaska does this, we can do that. And that, weakens our position. We want to make sure to catch those kinds of things and say, yeah, no, this is not the place to do that. We can consider it if we allow for it, but if it's we can only more of an ultimatum kind of thing, we typically would throw that out in the state of Alaska anyways. I was actually talking to a colleague the other day about, just, hey, what are some things that you've seen? Heard a story about an offerer who lost. They had been an incumbent. They submitted a proposal for the resolicitation, lost it. They were evaluated, scored low, lost. The resolicitation came up years later. So this is their opportunity to win. They submitted a proposal that was the exact same as what they had submitted previously, along with a cover letter and a bunch of language that said, you did it wrong. You scored us incorrectly. And that wasn't the time or place to do that. And of course, they were not awarded again. I've seen red flags, like an offerer who we required 3 references. They listed themselves as a reference. Like, huh, okay, well, that's an interesting approach. We had to work through that. And then in this particular procurement, we interviewed folks that were going to be the boots on the ground workers, managing this project and, our day-to-day contacts, not marketing, not sales, but they're actual people working. We saw some interesting behavior and it heard some answers to questions, ranging from being able to just lay out, oh yeah, I'm thoroughly familiar, intimately familiar with this project and how we plan to approach it. Here's everything I see. Cool, that's awesome. On the other end of the spectrum, we had somebody say, I was told to be here. We were just throwing our names in. We're not sure that we can do this, but I'm here. Okay, that's a red flag. We'll follow up on that. What are your actual capabilities? Um, and we followed up on all of those answers, and that was a very important process for this as well. But while we were working through that, this was probably the biggest, and probably where, as procurement people, we've seen concerns around cost as we go through and do all of these solicitations and run procurements. In this situation, the data network piece. So this is internet services across the state. So uh, in our metropolitan areas, Juneau, Anchorage, Fairbanks, all the way out to Bethel, Alaska, or Antioch, these far out villages. We had Firm B come in at $11.7 million, which is close to what we had budgeted, a little bit less than what we had anticipated. Firm A, right in the middle at $8.4 million. So they brought that down a little bit. And then Firm C, $4.8 million. Huh. I'm sure everybody would agree, like, that's a giant red flag. They not only had $4.8 million as their price, and so got the most cost points, they did really well on their technicals. So, all right, now we're kind of we need to explore what's going on here. We can't just say, oh, they're out because they got their pricing wrong. We asked them, hey, what's the deal? What did you miss? Like, what is it that you missed in this before we toss you as non-responsive? And they came back and said, no, we didn't miss anything. We looked at our costs. We're comfortable and confident that we gave you the best price and a price that reflects what we can offer this service at. Do we take that at face value? Can we? Especially me, tasked as a procurement officer to lead this thing with and award it with no protests. Make sure that it doesn't land on the front page that we awarded to a company that is going to turn around and ask for more money the minute we award them a contract. We've all seen that. I should have found the photo of it, but I think we've all at one point or another seen the photo of a yacht that says it's like original contract, and or the dinghy is original contract, and the yacht that it's attached to is change order. That's kind of what we're always afraid of. That's worst case for us, is that we get sucked into awarding at that low attractive cost, the cost that gets them the points or is the lowest bid, and then we're stuck in a situation where they can't actually perform at that cost. So we went back to them. We were having scheduled meetings. Hey, look, we need you to tell us how you came in at 60% below the budget that we went out for, and that your cost is, when we look at what the cost is in our state, how you came in half that. They came back with very compelling information. They showed us that they had done their homework, that they had been compiling and tracking internet transit prices, so the cost to do what we were asking them to do over time. You can see 1998, $1,200 per megabit per second of service, which is insane if you think about it. But at the time, a megabit, 1998, if I recall, let's see, I was graduating high school. I had a dial-up. I may have been on cable modem at that point, but it was right around the time I was moving from my 56.6K dial-up modem into cable modem service. But it was expensive to get like very low speed. That was the time when, not that I used Napster or LimeWire or anything, but you would queue up your music to download and wait overnight, and maybe it's there the next day and you find out you downloaded the wrong thing. But $1,200 all the way down to that same megabit per second service being 63 cents. $1,200 to 63 cents. Pretty crazy. So the market compression, the price compression over time influenced how they came up with their pricing. And their approach to how they put together their pricing for us made a whole lot of sense. You can see the red column there is what we budgeted. And we had worked with our IT folks on this, and they're like, yep, and this is what we're prepared to pay. This is, you know, how we see the next, the 5 years of this service from 2015 to 2019, how we see this service going. We're just going to keep paying the same amount every year. This firm came in and said, hey, look, no, we see based on that chart, we can kind of forecast what the actual cost is going to be. So that's that blue column. It's going to reduce over time. We're going to give you a rate that averages that out so that it's one, that green column stays. It's a little bit less in the first couple of years. It's right about the same in the middle year, and then a little bit more in the out years. So like that was their approach, and it made a whole lot of sense. We hounded them about this. Brian, I don't know if Jake's ever told you the stories, but we were weekly meetings, come back to us with more information, more and more. There's a lot more than what I'm showing here that, was trade secret, type information that showed their margins and their overhead to prove to us beyond a doubt, shadow of a doubt, that they were going to be able to perform as predicted. And so that was their 5-year contract. And at the end of the day, there was, nothing. I recall very specifically the program manager that I was working with, my contact with this company, just looking at me and saying, I don't know what else that we can give you. And I'm like, I don't know what else we can ask for. Honestly, at this point, we had so much information, and it really just came down to being able to say, we trust and we can verify and validate this information and move forward. They gave us some comparisons, what they had been able to do for other large clients in the state. So you can see that not only were they saying, hey, look, we can predict what's coming and give you a rate based on that, but also, look, we're already doing this. We had 4 or 5 years ago been charging a lot more for what we're charging those same clients now. So that also brought some being able to ask for kind of cost comparisons, similar client sizes, types, where they could demonstrate that they were already doing this. And, you're not always going to be able to do this just because they may not have the history, but it's something that you can ask for. And it's something that, you can say, we need some sort of proof or documentation that can give us more confidence in moving forward with such a big rate decrease in such a big, important contract. We're delivering internet services to essential locations across the state. We need to be sure that you'll be able to perform that, and that we're not paying, a cheap price for cheap service, right? So yeah, you can just see the comparison there is pretty telling, pretty compelling. So over the years, they have been able to decrease their cost by 78%. They also were able to show us, compared to the lower 48, what the real world is getting for their services. Our IT folks were so siloed in on Alaska service. This is what we expect to pay in Alaska. $12.5 million is what we think. That comes out to, $200,000 a month. We're fine with that. But really, down south at that time, 30,000 was the going rate. And what they had proposed was slightly more than that, knowing that there is a cost of doing business in Alaska that's going to bump that up a little bit. We have a fiber optic line that runs from Seattle all the way up to the state. That has a cost associated with it. So there is a delivery, a logistics cost, just like getting a car here, that you're going to pay a little bit more for living in Alaska. But certainly, instead of starting at the monthly budget and working backwards, they started from zero and worked up. Yeah. So at the end of the day, they were able to convince us that their pricing was accurate. we went ahead and awarded a contract to them. And the twist is I was tasked with getting more competition, which we did. We had more than the two historic providers submit proposals because with Simplar's help, we were able to make it a much more challenge based or expert based delivery project instead of, hey, this is what we want you to do. And in the past, our IT folks had drafted up a scope of work that said, here's how you'll do things, here's where we need it, here's this type of service you're going to provide. We moved all of that information into a current conditions section that said, here's how we're doing it today, and then left it much more open to how do you see performing these services. And so we got more competition that way, which was great. We ended up, because of how much communication we did about this particular project, at the end, when we awarded, we had those 4 buckets of service. We awarded to both service providers who had historically done this. So we awarded a couple pieces to one, a couple pieces to another, and said, we need you to work together now. They ended up not protesting, and the only thing they could have protested at that point, because they were so well communicated with, was the process itself, the nuclear option to bring it all down. And I don't think either one of them wanted to or really could do that. So we awarded to both performed at the pricing that they had proposed, and it was customer satisfaction was very high with this contract. So phew, I survived. My team was awesome, and working with Simplar through that was great. It was nice to have somebody to bounce things off of and get direction, because so often we're like just making these decisions in a vacuum, and so it's good to have a third party there to bounce things off of. So yeah, with that, I mean that was the telecom project in a nutshell.
Free class that we offer through NASPO and their Procurement U. It's a 3-part class. You're seeing this is a session 3 of 3. It's called our Effective Evaluations course. And we go through the setup of your evaluation strategy, how to go through your evaluation process, and we have a whole section on negotiations. We just wrapped this up the other week, and I know some of you in the audience were there. But what we do in this session 3, Negotiating for Success, is we go through the 5 most common types of red flags that we encounter, or at least things that we should focus on in a negotiation stage. So we go through how to plan ahead for potential risks that you might encounter, various key aspects of stakeholder coordination, oftentimes things that the supplier team needs from you as the client. You want to make sure that's ironed out. Known unknowns, concealed conditions, if a gap or other surprise pops up during negotiations, how to catch those things. And with red flags, yes, Jason today was showing one that where the biggest red flag was about price. And oftentimes that is an elephant in the room. In this course, we go through a few other examples where that was the case. And funnily enough, we have examples in there where the client teams, we ask them, hey, now they're about to enter negotiations. What red flags do you have? What do you want to start with? And it's like they drill into the center of the earth. And sometimes it's like, whoa, hold on. There's a big obvious question to ask here. It's often budget and cost related or schedule. But there are others too. Sometimes there are things that seem too good to be true in a proposal. There's potential bait and switch issues, things like that. Those would be other red flags that we might want to take a look at. So just want to let you know that that is there as a resource.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.